Friends, with joyful hearts together, let us worship God. May we begin with a prayer. Lord, for this day, for the gift of life, for blessings beyond measure, for this sacred space and the fresh breeze, sounds of happy children, and the inspired lake behind them, we give you thanks. Help us to set aside the busyness of our lives and the to-do lists and all the things we seek to accomplish, and allow that the hour that is before us be a time of inspiration and grace. Amen.
Good morning, beautiful. What's your day like today? You would say, tell her be here, public and you would nod your head. And I'd say, I'm not the perfect picture that you think. I may be different, that's just me. Can't hold back any longer, looking for the way. So can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Or am I just whispering away? Can you see me? Can you see me? For who I truly am? Hey there, friend, how you feeling today? Time to say, explain what I mean, but we go on to the next thing. And I say, I'm not the molded image that you see, more than you perceive. Can't hold back any longer, looking for the way. So can you hear me now? Can you hear me? I'm not just whispering away. Can you see me? Can you see me? Who I truly am. So can you hear me now? Can you hear me? I'm not just whispering away. Can you see me? Can you see me? Who I truly am. Breaking away from what don't pay. Chances are meant to take risks. Can't hold back any longer, looking for that way. So can you hear me now? Can you hear me? I'm not just whispering away. Can you see me? Can you see me? Who I truly am. Good morning, beautiful. What's your day like today? Can I say, what a beautiful thing it is to be yourself, no one else. What a beautiful thing it is to be yourself, no one else. What a beautiful thing it is to be yourself, no one else.
Please say good morning to those who you're seated near. And thank you for joining us for this morning's service of worship. We especially welcome those of you who are guests are with us for the first time, I want to say thank you to Olivia Kelvin for singing this morning. Really appreciate it. This morning, I provide not so much a sermon or a couple of shorter sermons, but instead a few stories that I think are instructive and hopefully meaningful for all of us in our lives. And I share those stories based on the sort of privileged role that I have as a minister, to be able to step into your lives or be invited into your lives as kind of a hybrid participant, observer, and advisor, to be present and to witness, for example, the mountaintop experiences that you have, like being bedside soon after a baby has been born, and have the privilege of joining the mom and dad and holding their hands while the newborn rests on mama's chest usually, and we say thanks to God for this precious gift of life. Or standing before a couple, as I've done twice in the last couple of weeks, as they hold hands and stare into each other's eyes and say, I do, in front of family and friends, I do promise to be with you no matter what. Or presiding, as I will next week, and as we did 4 weeks ago, when there were 4 generations here for 2 families, and welcome a baby and a child into the family of faith through the sacrament of baptism. And it is those rare and wonderful moments that are a great privilege and that really feed me. But the flip side is that for every mountain, there's a valley, right? And those times when people find themselves in deep and dark places and they're not sure if they're going to see the light of day in the same way again. And I'm often invited in for those. Like when a marriage goes south and the person you've committed yourselves to doesn't seem like the person that they used to be or that you thought they were. And it's pretty hard to even envision living with them anymore, let alone being married to them. Or you invite me in, as did a number of folks in the recent weeks when the sting of death has touched the family. And things kind of change forever. Or often I get involved with people who don't have anything to do with our church, as has been the case the last couple of weeks, when, and this will be a surprise to many of you, I've been involved in trying to help out, along with the police department and others, a homeless man who lives in Lake Bluff. And that's not something you think about or that most know about. But every day for 2 weeks, about 5:15 in the morning, a man named Brian would come with his bag and his cane, late 40s, and he'd sit after waking up as the sun came up, and he'd sit at the table at Bluffington's right outside the church office. And so on your behalf, as a minister representing this church family, I do what we can to try and help him. And the sad news in the case of Brian is, other than you're buying him a few meals, completely struck out in helping him. So I'm blessed to stand by your side in these mountaintop experiences and sometimes in the valleys. But more than anything else, I'm kind of there in those times in your lives, and you invite me to be there when you're on the side of the mountain. You're not at the peak, you're not in the valley, but you're in this place and you don't know what route to take. Do I go to the right? Do I go to the left? What am I going to do? Like the person who a number of years came to me and said, you know what, I want to have a baby and I don't have any prospects for marriage in my life. She wasn't looking for me to be a father. I don't think so. But she really, really, really wanted to be a mom. And she said, what do you think about that? Or, over 25 years ago, before I was in this church, a young couple, they had one 2-year-old baby. She was just pregnant with another one. Initial tests indicated that there could very well be serious problems with that child. And they asked me, what do we do? The only thing I can tell you about that story is that young man is now in his middle 20s, a college graduate, and living and working in the city of Chicago. The person who comes and says, you know what, I cannot stand my work anymore. I hate going to the office. I hate my job. I've got to make a change, but I've still got 2 kids in high school I've got to get through college. What do we do? Those stories, your stories, every single one of them true, is kind of how I spend my time. Not so much sitting in the office for 25 hours reading books and coming up with a sermon. Not so much leading programs and Bible studies. Not so much, as my buddies like to say, working a half day a week after I bought a sermon online. It's sort of mostly playing a supporting role, or trying to play a supporting role in the screenplay of your lives, trying to bring support and encouragement and love and occasionally fresh ideas, as well as a presence. And I know I fall short on this, but this is what I aim for, which is to mirror the compassionate love of Christ in your life. And sometimes, while this job overwhelms me just like your job probably overwhelms you, mostly you feed me. And this past week has been an incredible example of that. My life has been 3 funerals and a wedding. Not the movie 3 Weddings and a Funeral, but 3 funerals and a wedding. And while it's a little bit more than I bargained for, and means that this sermon was written yesterday morning because that was the only time of the week, and makes it a little bit more like 2-Buck Chuck rather than a finely developed wine, maybe from 2013, a nice Cab Sav. It is what it is. And I hope your thirst for some inspiration will be quenched in the way that mine was. Which in the past 3 days included doing a memorial service where the gentleman's ashes were blown out of an 8-foot-long Civil War cannon. Whoa. But I'll tell you more about that in just a second.
Oh, you have no idea how I'm down to be there. And looking back, it's hard to miss all the things we did. Oh, you are there to keep me on my feet. Wipe my tears when I fell to the feet. Always found the right word to say. Tell me I'm my way. Oh, there are days when the sun won't shine, the skies will rain, when nothing seems to change. And certain nights with too much in my head keeps me awake, and I can't catch up. Oh, you are there to keep me on my feet. Wipe my tears when I fell to the beat. Always found the right word to say. Tell me on my way. Sometimes I know it's not easy. Sometimes you make me crazy. But I know you're always there, even when I don't You pick me up whenever I fall. Never enough when I'm called. And through my highs and lows, you watch me grow to know. 'Cause you were there to keep me on my feet. Wipe my tears when I fell to the beat. Always found the right word to say. Tell me I'm my way. Yes, you found the right word to say. And now I'm on my way.
So I'm spacey by nature, but spacier than usual this morning, and I forgot to print out the scripture passage, and so it's on my computer. These are familiar words made into a song many of you remember, a popular folk song, and it comes from these words in Ecclesiastes chapter 3. And Ecclesiastes is the story of Kohelet, who was a person who had all the resources in the world to do whatever he wanted. And in his life, he pretty much went for it. And he became the richest guy, and he had the biggest houses, and he became the wisest man, and he also partied harder than anyone else. And when it's all over, he said, you know, everything is kind of chasing after the wind. The best thing that we can do is enjoy our work, and enjoy our meals, and enjoy the people in our lives. And so this is from chapter 3, where he writes about how there was a time for everything. There's a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones and a time to gather them together. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to search and a time to give up. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear and a time to mend. A time to be silent and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. So you want to know about the story with the guy whose ashes were blown out of the Civil War cannon. It happened this past Thursday in the North Woods outside Monaco, Wisconsin, in a private forest overlooking a beautiful lake. Jim Swartout, the father of Jim and Eileen Swartout of our church, or Jim Swartout, kind of wanted to go out with a bang, and so he did. In a burial service that combined a cannon, a bugler playing taps, bagpipes echoing throughout the woods, the serene sounds of nature, and this preacher. And to say it was memorable doesn't say enough. But there were two services that day, one in the woods and one at a club where all his friends gathered. And of all the things that were memorable, what was most memorable was Jim's life. You see, he never, ever let his circumstances get in the way of making the most of the gift of life with which he's been blessed. His childhood was as lumpy as you can imagine. He ran away from home where things were ugly, in Milwaukee, to his grandparents' house in Madison at age 7. Things were not good as a kid, but that never stopped him in his life. He had to start working at age 11. He became the man of the house at age 15 when they kicked his father out. He had responsibility at age 15 for 4 younger siblings, including an infant sister. That didn't stop him in his life. It wasn't an excuse. That he was the scrawniest lineman in the history of the Princeton, Illinois high school football team didn't stop him. That when he graduated from high school, he was probably better suited at 5'3" and about 115 pounds to be a jockey than anything else. Didn't stop him. And I don't know if this is a true story or not, but he told his family forever that in high school, he was voted the least likely to succeed. It didn't stop him. Jim didn't allow these incredible challenges that came his way before he was old enough to even vote to get in his way and shape his course. Instead, he used all the hurdles in his path as kindling to kind of fuel the fire for a life that became meaningful and wonderful in many, many ways. Jim used to tell everyone in his presence, you've got to be resilient. If you don't learn to bounce back, you're going to break. You've got to position yourself as a learner. Learning can never, ever stop. That's how he lived his life. It took him 8 years to graduate from the University of Wisconsin at Madison. He did like to have a bit of fun, but mostly it's because he had to work full-time to pay his bills and help pay for his family. He learned what he wanted in life because of what he knew he didn't want from his early years. And what happened? Ultimately, because he believed in himself, he believed that he was here on this earth for a reason, he became blessed with a wife and a family. It was pretty much the opposite of what he grew up with. And in an early life, it was defined by lack. Jim lived a life that in his adulthood was defined by abundance. He became a successful businessman. He enjoyed the creature comforts and all that brought. But most of all, it gave him the opportunity to be generous to other people, because when he was down and out, there were so many people that had been generous to him. The message of Jim's life is clear. Life is a gift. It's not about what happens to you or what happens to me. It's about what we choose to do with it. It brings to mind Maycat Niebler. God bless her. Many of you know Maycat as a part of this church the last 5 or 6 years. We held a service for her yesterday up at Shore Acres that was a blast, though there was no cannon. Maycat was one of the group, some of you are here, that I call the Silver Foxes. They're the older adult women in our church who have many been friends for decades. They take great care of each other, and they know how to have a bit of fun. Maycat's the one who, if you were at the dinner at Froggy's a year or two ago, right in the middle of Renee's talk about her life and her art, Maycat shot her hand up in the air, and she said, well, I'd just like to get this thing started. I'll bid $5,000 on that painting. Well, Renee had brought the painting just as an example of her work. She wasn't intending on selling it, let alone donating it to the church. You looked at me. I went like this. Everybody's looking around, and Maycat saying, you know, this is going to be great for the church. I'll bid $5,000. Well, Renee looked at her business manager, and we got together and decided to turn this into a silent auction, which was never part of the plan. Graciously, you agreed to sell the painting. Well, long story short, as it turns out, someone outbid Maycat. But I had to go to her house the next morning to tell her that this. How is this going to go? Well, I walked into her house. Maycat was still a little sleepy. And I said, Maycat, I am so sorry. Someone outbid you. And she, she's only about 5'2", 5'1" maybe at this stage. She looked up at me and she said, oh my God, that's the best news I've ever heard. First of all, I have no idea where I was going to come up with the $5,000. Second, my daughter Missy was going to yell at me for getting one more thing I don't really need. Not to mention the fact when I came home from that dinner, I sat down in front of the fireplace and I looked at the painting of my grandpa and I said, Grandpa, I feel so bad. I have no idea where I'm going to put you now. That's Maycat, whose grandchildren called her Granny Cat, which became G-Cat for short. Maycat's the one you may have seen driving silver hair, a fluorescent yellow smart car, possibly tiny. But then she wanted to donate it to someone, and I said, well, donate it to the church, and then we'll give the money to a favorite charity of hers, a safe place. And so I asked her if it ran, and she said it ran fine. And I said, well, why are you selling it? Well, she said, the girls that I go out with, none of them can drive at night anymore. I'm the only one left. So I got to buy a Lexus. So she could haul them all around. That's Maycat. She was probably, if I ever felt bad, I just needed to talk to Maycat because she was so generous with kind and sweet thoughts sent in my direction. She was so complimentary. But interestingly, on the last really good conversation we had, maybe 6 weeks ago before her health really turned, we're sitting together, the caregivers in the kitchen. Maycat says to me something the likes of which she never said before. She goes, Tom Dickelman, the problem with you is you talk the talk, but you don't walk the walk. I was just coming to say hi and visit. I look at the caregiver, she looks at me and she's like, I have no idea what was up. She says, you talk about all this stuff, but the problem is you don't do anything about it. Why don't we have more black people in our church? And I said, well, Maycat, that would be awesome, but here's the reality. In our church, we don't target any group. I don't target rich old ladies. I don't target gays or lesbians. I don't target suburban housewives or business people or blacks or whites or anyone else. The door is wide open for anyone, all the time, period. Well, she wouldn't have any of that. Maycat wouldn't let me off the hook. Finally, Maycat, to give you a sense of how she operated. One time, about 3 months ago, when I went to visit her, we were talking about what she was reading. She had just finished the rather spicy Tiger Woods book. And she said, I'm done with it. Here. And before I had a chance to say, you know what, I actually already have it on my iPad. It was in my lap. I took it home. When I opened it up, there was a piece of paper inside, and it just said, you can have a service for me, but what I want is a great party at Shore Acres. That's Maycat. And, ministers shouldn't have favorites like parents, but she was a favorite. And here's what you should know about her. Maycat, who lived a wonderful life just off Mayflower Road, and belonged to clubs and had wonderful friends and traveled the world. Maycat was not born with a silver spoon in her mouth. She was born with silver braces on her legs. Her youth was spent with polio. The stigma of that disease in the 1940s held her back socially and educationally. She didn't learn to read till later in life. Then her father died when she was in grade school. Then came a bad marriage, and she found herself in the 1960s being in her 20s, a single mom with 2 kids, no college degree to fall back on, no relevant work history. The polio-shaped Maycat's childhood, it didn't define her life. And she ended up becoming one of the more well-read people I knew, and also one of the most socially engaged, despite the difficulty of her childhood. And while death and divorce made her family life a real challenge from early on, it only intensified her resolve to have a meaningful family life herself, which she did with a wonderful second marriage to Arthur, 2 kids, and a fleet of grandchildren. Friends, it's not what happens to you and to me, it's what we do with it. We can make excuses about how tough things have been, about all the hurdles we face, or we can remember the lives of Jim and Maycat to make the most of their life despite their circumstances. Let me close with this. There will be peaks and valleys in all of our lives. And I know that because oftentimes I'm there with you, which is a great privilege. And I'm also privileged to be by your side when you're stuck on the side of the mountain and you can't decide which route to take on. When you're in those places, remember the words of Ecclesiastes. There's a time and a place for everything that happens to us. The question that remains for you and for me, and I hope you'll chew on it today and in the days ahead, comes from the poet Mary Oliver. We know how Jim and how Maycat answered the question. The question for Mary Oliver is this. From this day forward, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?
I remember going there, the windmills spinning through. But I kept my eyes straight over, never see sight of these gone by. In the dark, we laughed and we cried, and the rain would dry to the flowers, and the snow would fall till the sky turned blue. But we got no reason to hide in our paradise. We broke the boundaries. I know we walked without bed. The cracks in the ceiling as we became fearless strong. Climbing to new heights. The times we felt but survived, and the rain would drop to the flowers, and the snow would fall till the sky turned blue. But we got no reason to hide in our paradise. Oh, love trees land in the cool breeze. The fire lies at night in the night. We've grown as far as the eye can see. see as we move along with the tide. So we raised our cups to the battles we won. Our scars made us who we are, and only the light can testify how far we go. And the rain will drop to the flowers, and the snow will fall till the sky turns blue. But we got no reason to hide in our paradise. The rain will drop till the flowers bloom, and the snow will fall till the sky turns blue. But we got no reason to hide outside paradise.
None of us have a clue as to what tomorrow will bring. What we have is today, this extraordinary day with the breeze and the sun, and songs and friends and family. Make the most of it. Live in the light of God's love this day and every day. And go in peace. And the people said,
Amen. Oh, you are there to keep me on my feet. Why did I take nothing to you? I'm to say, tell me now,